highest, highest revenue collection of about 2.4 trillion in ordinary revenue, then it means that for every shilling collected, we are going to spend relatively above 60% of that in repayment of debt. And if you look at what comes ahead of that is the aggressive domestic borrowing. The private sector is being crowded out. Over the last couple of months, the CBK has reduced the interest rates, but the amount of the rate of interest on private loans is still sticky. It is not going down. Why? Because the government is a more attractive borrower from the banks. And the domestic debt has been very, very extremely aggressive. Because it has high yields, the premiums are good, the government is more secure. So there is no incentive for the banks, the private banks, to lend to the private sector. Compounding that problem is the pending bills. There was a declaration to clear pending bills, all that had been approved. And what we are seeing is, between last year, 2024, and this year, 2025, the pending bills have increased from 639 billion to 684 billion. This is forced lending by the private sector from the government. The amount at the county level has increased by around 20 billion, and at the national level has increased by more than 70 billion. So why do banks prefer to lend to the government, more than the private sector? I wish you would be seeing this. You would see the growth in credit to the government has been increasing in the last 6 months, from October 2024 up to around March 2025 when we are monitoring this. Comparatively, the credit to the private sector has been going down. In the same period, it's reduced significantly, meaning it's obvious that the government is a more preferable lender than the private sector. So that's why the economic growth has been so sticky, because the private sector operations have minimized. There's money owed to the private sector by the government in terms of pending bills, and most of those small and medium enterprises are no longer in operation because they are unable to sustain this kind of economic or the other business environment. Finally, on SHA and SHIF and its implementation in 2025. First is what we saw a few months ago, that similar to the problems that faced NHIF, there are still major governance and accountability issues in the way remittances are made to health facilities. There are delayed payments because, as the report that was published in May showed that 75% of level 3 to level 5 facilities are the only one that received SHIF payments. And from that figure, 83% of them received less than half of what they are owed. So this has been affecting the operations of facilities, and then also compromising the delivery of health services. If you look also at the registration of SHIF, it has about 22 million registered members, but only 4 million are contributing. Those are the people who are formally employed. So the health system of this country is running on the back of 4 million people. I don't think that's the best way to deliver universal health coverage. We are currently doing about 50% of what is required as a per capita investment on every individual to achieve universal health coverage. The method of means testing that was rolled out by SHA has also been having very many inaccuracies, you know, in determining contributions for the informal sector. And this has been a major complaint as we have had. There has been a very prolonged strike by the UHC health workers who are supposed to be absorbed by the county governments, and some budget allocation was made towards that to ensure that counties absorb these health workers. So what are we saying in conclusion? First is that the macro fiscal analysis that we've done reveals a widening gap between the stated policy intentions and the actual implementation. I think if for nothing else, if you forget everything else about SHA, this is what the major takeaway is. The policy intentions are there, but there is a bigger gap in implementing and executing them. So what does the government need to do? There are a number of things we submit here, and the panel will discuss them in greater detail. One of them is to implement predictable reforms. In this sense, we mean if the government commits to, say, clearing all pending bills, as a private business person, I should be confident that the government will pursue that, and it will honor its obligation to clear any pending bills. If we say that the fiscal deficit will be 4% of the GDP, the expectations of households that need to plan or private sector that need to invest is that they will not outcompete them in borrowing from banks, the domestic commercial banks. Then also anchor fiscal decisions in public participation. You know, this has been more so in the system, the different systems, the procurement system, the SHA systems. There are always a new system every day in the government procurement systems that has been challenged, that it has not undergone public participation. The biggest one is the one in the SHA system. Also, the other thing is accelerating pending bills clearance and safeguarding health sector investment to make sure that we protect the vulnerable. Finally, is the reduction on over-reliance on consumption taxes, the VATs and the like. So in most progressive countries, they invest more on income-oriented taxes, you know. But in income-oriented taxes, this is where we have the huge tax expenditure in our country. We are foregoing revenue of upwards of 400 billion every year, you know, on the pretext that we are going to spur economic growth, we are going to create more jobs, but we need to evaluate these tax expenditures against the policy objectives that they're supposed to pursue. In doing that, maybe we'll be able to bridge the fiscal gap, but that in itself cannot be sufficient. I will invite our panelists to reflect on these issues because I don't have enough time to go deeper, but they'll speak about them as we proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our country lead, Daniel Irangu, for triggering the buttons for us and triggering those light bulb moments so that we now get into the flesh and hear perspectives from our esteemed panelists on the reflections, on the findings, and most importantly to ask ourselves, what do we need to do? In policy conversations, one very important thing that we need to always carry forward is that the policy insights, the conversations that we raise should be irritable, so irritable that we cannot ignore them. We need to have credible arguments on what policy actions and reforms we need to make. So credible and very solid and backed by citizens' voices, backed by evidence, backed by thought-out analysis, so that as we advance these reforms, then we are able to see substantive change. I will welcome my colleague, Veronica Ndegwa, who will take us through the panel discussion. Good morning.
This is working. As introduced, my name is Veronica Ndegwa. Maybe I can get a different one. It's actually on. Can someone confirm it's working at the back?
Okay.
Yes. From the mic?
Yeah.
Oh. Probably I have big lungs, like Moses had. So I'll be moderating today's panel and just reflecting on the presentation that has been made. At IPF, we usually say our mission is to see all values of public principles of public finance are realized. But I think if what you've seen from the presentation is to continue, then IPF will be around for a very long while. The presentation has cast light on some of the challenges that we are facing as a country. We've seen that our growth numbers have been revised downwards. The fiscal deficit keeps widening because of revenue shortfalls and ever-growing public expenditures. The Kenya's debt to GDP ratio is above its anchor of 55% in net present value terms. And as even the debt grows, we have large payments scheduled on Eurobonds and other debt, including domestic debt that keeps growing. In terms of our policy framework, we see great persistent non-compliance in Article 223 in passing supplementary budgets, and there are concerns around debt sustainability because of our increased borrowing. And this, as highlighted by Daniel, risks crowding out the private sector. And from the growth numbers in terms of credit extended to the private sector, there is much higher growth in terms of lending to the government and a decline in credit to the private sector. As IPF, we try as much as possible to give policy alternatives to what the government is proposing, and this is what I hope my panel will do today. Mine is to ask the questions. I hope they are not hard. And my first panelist is our former PS at the National Treasury, Dr. Julius Muya, FCS. He has a very good and lengthy profile. I'll try to go through it quickly. FCS, FCPA, Dr. Julius Muya, CBS, is currently the public sector lead at Anderson, a consulting and tax advisory firm. His area of specialization is finance and public policy. Prior to joining Anderson in 2023, Dr. Muya served as the Principal Secretary at the National Treasury of Kenya, where he was responsible for coordinating and budgeting function, macroeconomic policy, mobilizing grant and debt finance, among others. This role also involved providing leadership in climate finance, as well as conceptualizing and implementing innovative reforms in policy, institutional, regulatory, and legal space. Dr. Muya has therefore extensive experience in public policy and economic planning. He is a regular speaker on various topics and subjects, and that's why we invited him here today. Dr. Julius Muya, kindly join us on stage. My colleague, Meshach, will guide you where to sit. I think you should sit on where the cameras are focusing more. The second panelist is Andrew. Andrew Kugo is a seasoned public finance expert with over 15 years of leadership in Kenya's public sector, specializing in public financial management, fiscal policy, and budget reforms to drive accountability and revenue growth. He is an FCCA and CPAK certified professional. He has spearheaded transformative initiatives, including serving as the county executive for finance in Taita Taveta. He is currently a PhD candidate with a focus on tax justice and climate responsive budgeting. Andrew, please. She did not introduce herself, but I have her profile here. Ms. Ruth Kendagor is the third panelist. She's an economist and a public finance expert with a passion for good governance and policy leadership. She champions fiscal transparency, prudent debt management, and revenue reforms that works to build partnerships that drive co-created, evidence-based policy solutions in Kenya and beyond. Ms. Ruth Kendagor is the Director, Global Partnerships at IPF. Welcome, Ruth. I also need to be directed on where to sit. Thank you, Mesha. And we can have mics for the panelists. All right. Our first question goes to Dr. Julius Muya. And I think, given the presentation, we've seen that major institutions are revising our growth downwards. So probably given your expertise in this space, you can tell us what is your view on Kenya's macro-fiscal outlook and what are some of the policy actions that could restore confidence in the economy for sustained growth.
Thank you for that question. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Let me respond to what has been presented to me, and really to appreciate first IPF for organizing these sessions. And also do appreciate Daniel for that very good presentation, although we missed on a few of the slides. So maybe when we get a chance to look at some of the slides, we will be able to interact with the subject better. But dealing with the questions that have been raised to me, one about what is our prospects as a country in terms of GDP growth, given the projections. And normally when you look at the various institutions that do their focus on GDP growth, there's usually some very close convergence, but not complete agreement in terms of 100% agreement. So 4.5, 4.8, 4.7%. I would say the projections are fairly credible in terms of where we are likely to see the economy going. And if you look at the past, and those of us who are academicians, and I want to appreciate you here, you can even look back, maybe 10, 15 years ago. Every year or every quarter of the year, we do this kind of like projections from various institutions. So how far do those projections go in terms of now being indicated by reality? And unless something happens which is very, very unexpected, usually the projections are not very far from the reality. So I see the economy growing more or less in the same region, 4.5, 4.8% has been projected. And I say so because one of the fortunate things that we have in Kenya is that we have very credible data from our KPS institution in terms of what is used to generate those projections, to generate those numbers in terms of where the economy is likely to head. Also, our economy is quite diversified. Unlike some economies where they rely on maybe one or two commodities, in which case a small change in a fundamental aspect, either sector or some world event, usually causes a big problem, a big swing in the GDP growth. In our case in Kenya, because of the diversification of the economy, we don't have that big risk of the economy kind of like growth shifting because of just one factor changing. Obviously, we rely a lot on rainfall, rain-fed agriculture, but to the extent that the rains have been sympathetic to us, I see that is a good anchor in terms of saying the economy will grow in the region that has been projected. So
My conclusion on that is that we are safe with that assumption of 4.5, 4.8%, unless something really drastic happens, like COVID happened. Who knew COVID would happen? So we pray that nothing as tragic and as devastating as COVID happens. Now, you did ask me about some policy reforms that can restore confidence in the public on the economy and the government in terms of how we are doing. Of course, there are very many, but let me just pick a few. And one of them, and I was making notes as Daniel was making the presentation. So one of them that I picked very quickly is the issue of our public debt. And there are a lot of nomenclatures, a lot of words that you can use to address that issue. So when I was in the public sector, we used to talk about fiscal consolidation, and it's still the case, fiscal consolidation, where you reduce the budget deficit very proactively and also reduce the accumulation of debt. But also you go ahead and address something called liability management, where you're looking at the maturity profile of the debt that you have, you're looking at the cost of the debt, and you are looking at how the repayments on the debt will be made and what is the risk which is underlying in the debt. So if we can very, very proactively focus on fiscal consolidation so that it is not just a pronunciation of a number, that sometimes then we look for reasons why we do not achieve it. If we can proactively deal with liability management, in terms of the maturity profile of our debt, in terms of the cost of servicing our debt, in terms of risk of our debt, that can help a lot. And that can reduce the crowding out of the private sector, where money comes out of the banks and is given to government through treasury bills and bonds, so that government can then finance its budget. So that's the one recommendation that I would make in terms of policy action. Now, the second one that I would recommend would be looking at the issue of just budgeting as well. Because the way Daniel did present the numbers here, it was very clear that budgets of government and government expenditure has a sticky behavior. You know, you have numbers that are thrown in there, and getting them out is very difficult. If you look at the austerity measures here, I did a quick count. There were about 10 lines of austerity measures. Can you remember how many of those 10 lines were achieved? There were 2. So in our simple maths, what is the achievement rate? 2 divided by 10, 20%, right? Because government expenditure tends to be sticky. Something that you've always budgeted for before, you keep on budgeting for it, even when the reason for that budget has disappeared. So I would say focusing on capital expenditure, focusing on revenue expenditure, and by the way, and I want to say this because I have the mic, the electronic government procurement system, EGP, is one very tried and tested method and tool that has been used globally to deal with controlling government expenditure for what we call common user items, both goods, services, and public works. It is something that is tried and tested and that can help reduce the government expenditure. The third item that I would mention very quickly, it is something that Daniel also mentioned, and I took note of that. And he did indicate that there are
credibility of the systems that we leverage on to inform public policy and policy decisions has been stable, yes, but there is room to improve further. Now, specifically with regard to revenue projection, within the financial year 2024-2025, the year that ended June 30th this year, we saw the revenue projections being revised up until the point of supplemental revenue 3 at the end of financial year, moving from a target of 2.9 to 2.4 trillion. But if you look back in the past, in the previous years, missing the revenue targets is not something new. It's not something that we can credit or say this was a particular instance or an outlier within the financial year 2024-2025. Over the past almost 10 years, our budgeting system and our financial planning has always shown that we have missed our targets. And notably, the gap between the target and the actual has been growing. Revenue generation and revenue collection has been growing, yes, but the gap between the target and the actual has also been growing. Around 2012, our revenue gap, or the gap between the target and the actual, was around 30, 40, 50 billion. Now we are looking at something 70, 80, close to 100. So it is more than just the shocks that came with the citizen uprise and the rejection of the Finance Bill 2024. There is more, a bigger and a deeper systematic issue that needs to be addressed. Why are we seeing this shortfall? Number one, our assumptions when we're making revenue projections have not always materialized. So government needs to look back at the assumptions, at the projections, the fundamentals that inform the projections that are being made so that they're realistic. One of the things PS Muya has mentioned is the growth in the private sector. We have always put quite some emphasis on the private sector growth that will then relate or realize into revenue collection, but that has not been the case. Secondly, the frequent changes in tax laws contributes to uncertainty that is not harmful to the economy. And this has been discussed in several platforms. Last year, we had the medium-term revenue strategy coming into place. The intention of the MTRS was to provide that predictability, that stability in terms of revenue reforms, so that business people, citizens, investors can have an outlook, a 3 to 5 year outlook on what to expect in terms of revenue reforms, and therefore create some sense of stability and predictability. But what we have seen is that the revenue targets, so the actual implementation of the revenue strategy has not really been followed to the letter, and so the concerns of uncertainty and lack of predictability still holds. And thirdly, as a response to that also, is the issue of revenue leakages. Our projections may have some credibility, but the leakages in the system still exist. Leakages starting from tax exemptions. At the current system, our tax exemptions are about 500 billion, which is a significant amount. Literally, that is double what we spend on the health sector, providing health coverage for our country, Kenya. So we need to look at these revenue leakages, so that as we're making exemptions, then we ensure that we're making revenue projections for what we want to collect, but also sealing the loopholes that lead to seepages or leakages of the revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Predictable tax environment, as well as addressing the problem of tax expenditure. So coming to you, Andrew, sticking to the question of reforms, and this question was targeted at you intentionally. And I think over the past few years, we have seen citizens being more informed, both on the kind of budgeting the government is doing and as well as the tax reforms. And as Ruth mentioned, the 2024 protests around the finance bill was a good example of an informed citizenry. So the question is, how can the government better design its reforms to balance Kenya's fiscal needs, because we do have fiscal needs, including debt service, and while also being acceptable to the citizenry?
Thank you. You've brought me back to the issue of, say, the Gen Z protest, and I think it came at the right time, Why do I say so? It's because it put the government on the spot that something is not working. Can you listen to us as citizens? So what does that tell us? We have a citizenry that is well knowledgeable. You'll be surprised, most of the people who are active in terms of demanding more, in terms of the government policies, are people who are just coming from college, university. These are people who have gone through the free education system that was there. So you find they have the knowledge. Then two, we cannot run away from the fact that we live in a technological era where information is available at the palm of your hands, just by your phone. You know, you can do a short analysis of what is happening. So once government understands that, then now we start coining and framing our policies towards that. Now, first and foremost, for me, I think having looked at it, I would suggest, or I would tell the government that it is now mandatory for us to embed public participation, or if we may put it that way, public participation in budget formulation and tax policies. That one needs to happen now. I know we have a bill in Parliament concerning issues to do with public participation. I'm not so sure whether it is an act, hopefully, because it would have laid down a framework of how the citizens are involved. So what you may call public participation is not public participation. I can comprehend what is said in a tax, in a finance act bill, finance act, or even the budget. I can understand it, but who caters for the mwananchi back in my rural area, say in the far-flung area like Turkana? So how are we bringing them on board? See, so the government now needs to look at that. How are we going to communicate our policies to our citizens? That is number one. They have to do that. So they have to find a way. And in doing that, they also have to bring in the element of technology. ICT ministry now has, for me, I look at it as an open forum for them to use all available forms of media, social media, and what have you, to communicate. That's how you bring in the citizens so that they can own some of these things. Then number two, even as we look at how we're going to engage the citizens, let's also talk about having progressive tax policies. I think my panelists here have talked about it. We need to know. You see, it is very strange when you wake up prior to 2024. We woke up and then we're told now there's a housing levy that will be charged. That was not in your budget. You know, when I wake up, I go to work, I know at the end of the month I expect to receive this. Then all of a sudden you're hit with the housing levy. All of a sudden you're hit with CHA. All of a sudden, so all these changes bring uncertainty, and this uncertainty now rattles the public. So let's have a tax policy that is, predictable, something that we can sit down and say, okay, why don't we monitor it for the next 2-3 years? What has been the shortfall? How do we now look at, say, the leakages? Something that we can comprehend, understand, and we can follow through. If we get that, then I think the government now will be doing it well. Then the third thing, communication. I cannot stress that more than enough. The government is not communicating with the citizen. Unfortunately, that is what is happening. That's why, as someone who really did analysis of the Finance Act 2024, there were a lot of good things in it. How did the government communicate? They failed to communicate. So, as someone who probably is looking at housing levy, I would wake up and shout and say, no, this one, no. But you see, the government needs to adopt a much more citizen-centered communication where we communicate openly and tell them, you know what, why we're bringing this is because we want to achieve 1, 2, 3. This tax we're collecting, how are we spending the tax? Let's have open forums whereby we have candid and open discussions. And once we do that, then I do believe that even bringing in new policies or coming up with new frameworks for the government, it will be very easy for them because they have communicated, they have taken in the citizens' perceptions about it. It's more or less of an interaction. But until then, I don't know. Maybe we'll experience more of these unsettled citizens and what. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Effective public participation anchored on effective communication. So coming back to you, Dr. Muya, you spoke about liability management, and this is in the context of managing our public debt better. My question is, should debt restructuring be part of the conversation around liability management? And secondly, we've seen the government shifting. I called it creative, quote unquote, borrowing approaches, such as securitization. In responding to that question, you can tell us what securitization is and the fiscal risks that it presents.
Thank you, Veronica.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah. Oh, lovely, thank you. That's it.
No, I might change the mic.
This one I give away. Okay, this is better. So going back to the first question, and I think the big question is not just about liability management. What I was reading as Veronica was going through the question, by the way, how much time do I have? I have 3 minutes to convince you. So this is a big subject actually, which can take me quite a while. But let me try to rush through in the 3 minutes that I have. And so I think the elephant in the room is restructuring. I think that's a question I've been asked. In terms of the implications, when you talk about restructuring, it is something that you only do when you are unable to service your debt, as is the case in the public sector. Now, that is something that is not very, very welcome. And countries that submit themselves to restructuring would be countries in debt distress, not with high risk of debt distress, like is the case for Kenya. And restructuring can take very, very many forms, postponing the payment of debt as it comes due, changing the interest rates, haircuts, thank you very much, haircuts, and also could be reorganizing the maturity profile, I said about delaying payments and so on and so forth. So it is something that you don't just rush into it. But there's a better way of dealing with public debt other than submitting yourself to restructuring. And it is the situation and the right nomenclature, and thank you Veronica for using that word, is liability management. And here you are looking at an active and a proactive stance in terms of looking at the maturity profile of your public debt. You are looking at your cost of debt. You are looking at the repayment program that you have on your debt, and you are looking to make sure that you've got the lowest cost for your debt. You are looking to make sure that your risk of debt, kind of like default on the payment, is minimized as much as possible. But at the same time, that exercise must also be anchored on ensuring that you are providing enough finance for the government to finance its both capital and revenue expenditure. And so I want to say, thankfully, there are a lot of tools that are available for proactive liability management. And that is something that if a government prioritizes it, there are very good examples of how various governments, and I can quote some examples in Africa, Benin, Seychelles, Senegal, Rwanda. I mean, these are countries that have been involved in very active liability management. and have been able to significantly reduce their cost of debt. In fact, I do submit here that when those countries issue Eurobonds, they are able to issue Eurobonds at a lower cost than Kenya. And that is because of very active liability management. So I think on the liability management and the question about restructuring, I have done a bit of justice. Now, the question about securitization, this is a long debate. And looking at it just straight from the word securitization, it relates to either assets or revenues, where an institution has got a pool of assets, and that pool of assets, then you structure them in a way such that you can sell them to investors through what is called an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, which is created so that you transfer those assets to that special purpose vehicle, and it is that special purpose vehicle which manages the assets so that the returns from the assets can be used to pay the investors who have given you the money. So that is on the asset side. And you can think about assets in Kenya that can be put in such a vehicle. But I think what is being asked today here is the securitization of revenues, where you've got future cash flows. Like for instance, I think the best example would be like the road maintenance levy, RML, where you've got a predictable income stream, and you know that in the next so many years, this is how much you'll be collecting in terms of road maintenance levy. And so instead of waiting for those years for the money to come in through the levy, then you organize and package that revenue in a way such that you transfer the revenues and the rights to the revenues to a special purpose vehicle that you create. And so that when the road maintenance levy is collected in future years, instead of it coming to the institution in government that receives it, it goes now to that special purpose vehicle that has been created. Now, if you look at it, there are, okay, the word Veronica has used, innovative, yeah. There is an innovation around it, because you are saying rather than wait until 10 years to get this accumulated revenue from road maintenance levy, let me get the money now and then use it for whatever purpose. But I think that's where the catch is. Once then you get that money up front, what you do with the money? Unafanya nini na hiyo pesa? I think almost everybody understands why. Unafanya nini na hiyo pesa? And I think that's a big question we should ask ourselves. If that money is not used to repay some existing debt, then you then end up in a problem in terms of incurring a fiscal risk. Because that money will not be available in future to do that which it was meant for. Like for instance, if you securitize road maintenance levy, then the collections in the future will not be available to maintain the roads. So where will you get the money to maintain the roads in future? And so that's one of the big questions. The other one is the governance around it. I mean, how do you then make sure that you structure a special purpose vehicle that properly takes the risks on that revenue and make sure that there's transparency in the way the structure has been set up? Because if there is no transparency, the people who will invest in that SPV to give government money, they will ask for a very high return. So it will cost the government a lot more in terms of now the money that they have received upfront than if they used another mechanism. And so there are a lot of things that one has to be very careful when you are getting into a securitization program, because there are those issues about the pricing, transparency, the special purpose vehicle, and the fact that the government does not get the money immediately. The last point I want to say is that usually governments do not give security for what they borrow. I want to repeat that. Usually governments don't give security. When you buy a treasury bill or a treasury bond, you don't ask the government to give you a guarantee, do you? You don't. And also when we do the Eurobonds issues, when we do when we borrow money from banks, government does not give us security. But in securitization, government actually gives a security, because the security is the underlying asset or the revenue streams that you transfer to the SPV. So there's a whole big question. If you've got a market that is functioning perfectly, then the persuasion to use securitization is sometimes a little bit difficult. But that is something that we can discuss more on the issue of market failures and how you deal with market failures. Thank you, Veronica.
So thank you for that response. And as the good book, the Bible says, let them those who have ears hear. But I think my key takeaway is on transparency. I am still looking for a government document explaining what securitization is. Honorable Ndindi Nyoro confirms there is none, and so I think that is one of the areas that we'll be speaking on in his keynote address. Coming back to you, Ruth, given the situation we are facing today, is there still scope for fiscal consolidation, or should we forget about it? And can we still pursue fiscal consolidation and still safeguard our growth?
Thank you very much, Veronica. I think one of the biggest ways and the biggest gaps we have with our fiscal consolidation is on expenditure management. And if we can find the grasp and the grip on controlling our expenditure without compromising development, without compromising social protection, then we will have some progress and we will have light at the end of the tunnel. Normally in our financial years and our budgeting, we see that at the beginning of the financial year, there's really some optimism in terms of the budget deficit. There's optimism in terms of proper debt management. But as we get to consecutive revisions of the budget and the supplementary budgets, the numbers widen. Every time there's an increasing number in terms of budget, so we increase the budget, the projected expenditure, we reduce the revenue targets, and so our fiscal deficit continues widening, and we veer off from our fiscal consolidation path. And so one of the best ways for us to progressively work towards fiscal consolidation is to control our spending and enforce expenditure discipline. The second issue, and I will not repeat in detail, is what former PS has mentioned, Dr. Muya, about liability management. If we are able to properly implement liability management, and we look forward to a detailed session where we speak about liability management, and I hope we will have Dr. Muya with us again to share insights. I think we will nail it, because we spend a significant part of our revenues paying off debt, on debt service. Revenue that would have then been spent on essential expenditure, so that we are able to then reduce the non-essentials. So that is another critical area that we need to work on. And last but not least, there is progressive space for us to continue looking at our revenue mobilization efforts, so that as we reduce expenditure, we are also increasing revenue progressively, so that the gap is then reduced. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And I think us better managing our expenditures remains key, because that's where the bigger problem is. So coming back to you, Andrew, I think one of the questions, or one of the things that usually come up a lot is around governance. And my question is, to what extent are our fiscal challenges as a result of gaps in our governance?
Right. Let's face it, before I get into it, let's be honest to ourselves as Kenyans. Politics and economics in this country go hand in hand. Mheshimiwa here will tell us politics is about interests, and interests emanate from the economy. So let's agree, first of all, that is a problem in itself, because as long as we cannot separate the two, then we'll definitely have issues with how we handle governance. And why do I say that? Look at the challenges we're facing right now. Our fiscal space is shrinking. Why is it always shrinking? Why are we talking about revenue shortfall? Why are we talking about, say, matters to do with corruption? Why are we talking about non-compliance with Article 223 on supplementary budget? All these issues are mirrored in issues to do with governance. So ideally, yes, we do have an issue with how we govern or we run the government. And basically I look at it in terms of, are we complying with the laws that we have enacted ourselves? Are we? So that is where the problem starts. It's about governance. You have the laws, you're not following the laws. If it is about borrowing, to what threshold? Are we as a nation able to borrow over and above our current level where we are? No, those are some of the questions we need to ask. Why can't we make a budget that mirrors the revenues we collect? Why can't we live within our means? Daniel projected the austerity measures. Out of 10, only 2%, 20%, if I may put it that way. We are in compliance with 20. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we have a systematic problem with governance and how we govern this country and how we sort of implement those laws. So for me, I think if we are to get out of this particular situation, let's strengthen some of these institutions. You know, when we did the Constitution 2010, it came with so many bodies that are here to help us govern this country. The Office of the Auditor General, very key. But when we look at those reports, who listens to them? Who really pays attention to what is being said? The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, vital in trying to, you know, for lack of a better word, whip us to comply with the laws that we've done. But who's talking about that? Why do we have the PFM Act? Because it clearly states on matters you were discussing about pending bills, and it clearly states first charge should be those pending bills. They are not being paid. Why? So it's just a matter of compliance, and compliance I related to governance. So it's very simple. We have everything. It's for us to comply, and once we start complying with some of the laws that we as a nation created and formulated and say this is how we want to govern our country, we want to govern our counties, then we have it. So until then, we'll still have the problem of economics and politics. So I'll finish it off and say it also matters, do we have the political goodwill? If we get the political goodwill, then some of these things will work. But as long as we do not have the political goodwill, then the effects will be seen on the economic side of this country. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive response. And for those of us who are students of economics, the first thing we are introduced to is The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and it was an essay on political economy. Probably there's a reason why in those olden days, politics and economics were one, right? So with that, I think I'll pass it to the audience. Because of time, I would restrict it to 2 questions or 3 questions and indicate the panelists would like to respond. And I would request the media to hold on their questions for one-on-one session with the panelists or any other person within the room. So for the rest of the audience, if you have a burning question and to whom you'd want to direct it to. The first 3 hands, I see one. Unfortunately, the media is...
Some space, please.
Yeah.
We have 2 here, Veronica.
I'm taking 3 and not from the media.
No, it's not media.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, which and which?
There's a gentleman here.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
There are 2 ladies here. Okay, we can take the 4 hands. I think I saw 4 hands. We are starting with Ms. Janet. Keep it short so that we're able to take the 4 instead of 3. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Veronica, and thank you, our panelists, and also the Rango's presentation. But I thought in today's meeting, we should have broken it a little further. Like Ruth, when you say expenditure management, for this forum, it's good to say what that literally means. Because we are in an economy where businesses have shut down, we're in an economy where people have stopped going to school, we're in a place where the situation is dire. I feel that in the panelists, if we can go a little further and really speak through the actual situations, and even in the analysis and the report, what are the implications of the policy reforms that are performing or not performing, so that then it informs the citizen what is the actual situation on the midterm diagnostics. Thank you.
So good morning, panelists. Thank you very much for that very informative session. My name is Mudani Gashire. I work at the Kenya School of Government. Listening to this, it's very, let me say, depressing. I'm a lawyer, and bottom line, it's an issue of lack of coherence to constitutionalism. And looking back, 15 years since we enacted a constitution, the idea behind this constitution was to ensure that those in leadership are able to be good stewards of our financial management. And all these policies we are talking about are already in our books. And the question I have is, how do we make constitutionalism work? That beyond whoever is the leader, that we can ensure that this is done. And leadership does not become an avenue for self-greed, self-whatever, because this seems to be the issue. And that's why we enacted this constitution. And so I'm just wondering, how do we make this work? Because it needs to work. Today, there are thousands of families who cannot feed themselves. Today, there are thousands of families, children are not able to go to school. Today, families are going bankrupt because they are trying to get their loved ones to hospitals. Yet, we have leaders as stewards. And I'm left wondering, how do we make stewardship be implemented? It's not an if or when, it is supposed to be done. So I probably think none of us can answer that, but I think we need to go through this, because this is the issue. It is not all these policies, it is the issue of non-compliance to a constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one, 30 seconds.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony, and I work in the banking industry from UBA. So I think mine is very simple. Let me make it simple, but it's a bit complicated. So the first one is, it's normal for any household. As I grow my budget, I will definitely grow my expenses. When my expenses this year were 20, next year I want my expenses to be 30 or 40 or 50. I know Mheshimiwa is here. Which reforms are there in Parliament that make us look at the expenditure side? Because you see, we have a norm whereby every year the budget is going up. We're talking about revenue reduction. But I can't see any reform that is set up to talk about expenditure reduction. I think that's the biggest problem. The second question I'd like to ask is, who said we must have a finance bill every year? No, it's nowhere in the Constitution. Let me be honest. Who said tax has to be changed every year? You know, those are the questions that I'd like to be answered.
Thank you very much. The final. Hi. This turn.
Good morning. My name is Shalin Mumbomola, boot camper at the Institute of Public Finance. and a very passionate young Kenyan, may I add. I can't help to wonder, is it about time that as a nation we come to the conclusion that perhaps the devolution of power isn't necessarily meeting our expectations and rather becoming an economic hindrance? According to the data that Daniel gave us, he said that our devolved units are majorly reliant on the government for 90% of their budgets, which translates into recurrent expenditure. So does that mean that now we can sit down and say that perhaps if we reduce the devolved units in our country, that will translate into us no longer missing our revenue targets, and as well as bettering the service delivery in our country and also creating a larger growth margins in our economy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Charlene. I think because of time, we'll take those ones. My panelists, kindly respond to the question you're comfortable with. We'll start with Ruth, and while at it, also give your closing remarks, your parting shot. In 1 minute, kindly.
Thank you very much, Veronica. You know, one of the essence and the main reason why we have these sessions is to create that demand for these conversations. And I'm really happy listening at the questions that are coming in saying that this is not enough. We need to deepen this, widen this, and probably make it even more frequently and more visible and more useful in the conversation. So maybe I'll speak into the part on expenditure management, and I'll give 2 examples on what we can do in terms of expenditure management. Number 1, prioritization. Let us look at our spending. It is okay for us to spend on everything that we need, on schools, on renovations, on ICT and everything. But are they all a priority? Our colleague and friend today from the banking industry has mentioned that even in your households, you work with a budget. And in our households, we prioritize. You will put food on the table, pay rent, pay school fees, before you think about extra clothes. You will reduce on certain items because other things take priority. Is it possible for us to do that as a government, as a country? Yes, it is. Secondly, wasteful spending. And when I say wasteful spending, it's not just wasteful in terms of things that are not necessary, but even items that are necessary but are not working. Let me explain what I mean. If you have a moment after this event, go to the IPF website, look for our analysis called the Annual National Shadow Budget. In the shadow budget, we analyze government budgets, past performance, as well as analyze or critique the credibility of the projections for the coming year. One of the things that we have raised consistently is that in our budget spending, we execute our budgets as allocated. The monies are allocated and spent very well, or at least spent to almost 100%. But the non-financial indicators, the targets that were set alongside those resources are not met. If you're given money today to educate 1,000 children, and you spend 99% of that money, but you only educate 600 children, where did the resources that was meant for the other 400, where were they spent on? Can they be sent back to the kitty? Or can there be a proper explanation as to why these resources were not used? Those are some of the issues that we hope progressively Parliament will pick up, so that we are able to interact, and we have institutions that give us this information. We have the publications by IPF. We have the Controller of Budget that publishes budget expenditure reports. We have the Auditor General who gives the analysis of what is happening with our resources. One of the key issues before Parliament to pick this up and institutionalize these discussions, so that before new budgets are allocated, before new resources are allocated, then we are able to look at past expenditure and use that to make informed decisions. Thank you.
All right. If you'll allow me, I heard about devolution and finance bill every year. Let me respond to those two. Now, do we really need a finance bill every year that does all those amendments to the rates and what have you? It has come at the right time, this question, because currently I'm working on a paper on really, is it working? These continuous amendments, yearly amendments. And I've not finalized it, but you can see when you look at the data you have, really there's no much we gain from it, to be quite honest. And Mheshimiwa will bear me witness in this. So it is not about the finance bill. It is not about the erratic amendment of those regs and what have you. It is how are we implementing that particular document. We might have a finance bill, probably for me, and one of my recommendations would be, let's have a tax policy that tells us in the next 5 years, this is what we should be having. You know, once we have that, then how do we now pull in everyone into the tax bases so that, you know, the landlords here, they are paying the tax and what have you. So it is more of enforcement now rather than every year coming up with a finance bill. For me, I think that would be the way to go. Let's have a tax policy. Let's look at how are we implementing it, the enforcement part of it. We've talked about devolution and economic hindrance. I was privileged to be the pioneers who started the county governments. And I would be very frank on this platform that Kenya was never ready for 47 county governments, unfortunately. Let's just be honest. And just look at it, you know, I've been there, we've had economic regional blocks. Why are we having such discussions? Because we're trying to pull in or rope in economies of scale as counties. What does that tell us? Did we have a problem with the 8 provinces we had? We should have done 14. They would work better because now you're pulling in the resources you have and doing one thing. Say a county right now is struggling with you know, one project that if it pulls resources with the 2 other of its neighbors, they would do a mega project and it would benefit all those people. But you see now we're subdividing and subdividing. So for me, I think I am sort of in agreement with you. 47, I think we need to start asking ourselves this question. Do we really need 47? And to be quite honest, the answer is no. Let's talk of 14. Closing remarks, I think IPF, I need to give you credit for this. These platforms, I look at this fora and platform as incubancy to policy. And I'm glad we have even Mheshimiwa here. So let's have these gatherings, let's have these cities, and IPF and other think tanks. This is what we need. Let us, because from here we'll be shaping policy in this country. From here we'll be shaping how we want governance to be done or conducted in this country. So my gratitude to IPF for this particular sitting, and we hope there'll be more, whereby we'll be challenging policy and recommending policy. Thank you.
Dr. Mira, in 1 minute, I know I'm a bit unfair to you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, my colleagues have done justice to some of the comments that I would have made. But let me jump straight to what Modoni you said about constitutionalism, and we are failing to reap the fruits of constitutionalism, and is constitutionalism not what? And so I had some esteemed in the national economic and social.
Right, yeah. So in my past life, I was the CEO of the National Economic and Social Council, which was responsible for coordinating the formulation of Vision 2030. And that was in the year of our Lord 2008 when it was launched. And one of the things that was very, very clear to us was that in addition to constitutionalism and the laws that support the constitution, including regulations and whatever government issues, you need to address something called national values. And that informed Article 10 of the Constitution, where we talked about national values and principles of governance. That also informed Article 132. So my brothers and sisters, I want to persuade us that one of the things that we haven't done good justice is to progress that national values and principles of governance. I know we have set up institutions which have the mandate of promoting the national values and principles of governance, but I would submit here if IPF can also look at a way of monitoring and evaluating to what extent we have implemented Article 10 and Article 132. That can provide a basis of us making sure that the things that government says it's going to do are done. Because behavior has a lot to do with your values. I can talk a lot. But let me just say the last thing about Anthony and the expenditure and the issues that are surrounding it. I think there's a lot that we can talk about how government should and can ensure that it controls public expenditure. I had touched on it earlier on, and I would also say another session with IPF, we can actually just zero in on this, because this to me is a big thing. You know, making sure that you've got value for money for government projects, you've got value for money for government procurement of goods, services, and common user items. Just make sure that you don't have parallel and duplicate projects that are being implemented. There's a lot that we can do to manage government expenditure. But there is the question of all the interested parties who are on the table when we are doing this government budgeting. Just to make sure that we rein them in and we say, this is the cap. I mean, you can't go above this. It is possible, some countries have done it. I mean, and we are not lesser mortals. We can do it. I want to thank IPF for inviting me to make this comment. I could have spoken a lot, but there's always another time. Thank you, and God bless us all.
All right, thank you very much. And I think I do not have anything else to add. But as Daniel said, the intention is there. The gap remains in implementation. That has been our time. I had 45 minutes, and I can't believe we're already over time by 7 minutes. Apologies for that. Let's appreciate my panelists. Thank you very much. I hand it back to Ruth.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists. They have compensated while the mic was failing me. I hope you have enjoyed the chat. I want to take this opportunity now to invite our CEO, James Moragori at the Institute of Public Finance, to just say a word and then invite the keynote speaker of the day. Excellent. Right. So are you all set? So James, you have a raised platform. Hoping that you punch higher as you invite the keynote speaker.
Thank you very much, everyone, and good morning. I have a very simple task. First of all, to say thank you to my team at IPF and to thank our panelists for such an engaging conversations. But I have, as part of this summary, based on what we've had. Okay, the media is telling me, are we good?
You can easily embarrass yourself if you go off the facts. Because some of the things we deal with are factual. Many things that are can be numerated, things that can be put in figures, unfortunately. Whatever verbosity you put around it, whatever speech you may put around it, 2 + 2 always is 4. Whatever you describe 4 as, it will end up as 4. So I'm very glad that we are discussing that. And the fact that it shapes the other. Politics shapes the economy, but on the other side also, the economy shapes politics. The more advanced a country becomes, the more aware the people become, and the more uwajibikaji in terms of the politics that is enhanced. And therefore, there is a very thin line if there is at all. We are in a situation which is very good in terms of global economy. And I've been studying economies over time, and I can confidently say that the global economy now is in summer. Is in summer because there is nothing much in terms of the downside that is ongoing in the global economy. And therefore it presents a very good opportunity for every secular economy of the world to take advantage of the summer to do what they need to do. Why do I say so? Currently, in terms of stability, other than the wars that the economies have already factored in, the economies of the world has already factored in what is ongoing in the Middle East. The economies of the world have already factored in what is happening around somewhere near Europe. We've already factored in that as economies. And fortunately, even in terms of supply chains and in terms of planning, that is already there, and it has been for years. So we have some stability in regards to the global geopolitics. When you look at the economy globally also, we are now in a sphere and in a path of decimated rating rates in terms of lowering of rating rates across almost all the economies of the world. There is quantitative easing across. The Federal Reserve will be meeting, I think, next week, if not this week. Actually, this week, the Federal Reserve of the US. And whatever that meeting will come up with affects my grandmother's plate in the village, affects many things that we do in our economy. The pity is that there is great expectation that we are likely continue with quantitative easing, will likely continue with expansionary policies in the monetary side in terms of lowering of the rating rates, starting from the Fed rate, CPR rate, and of course, supposed also to go to the private sector, supposed to. So the economies of the world we are buoyant. I mean, we have all the ingredients of an economy to grow. All of them are on the table. When you have rates going down, rates go down because private sector wants to be incentivized. And all those are happening now. In Kenya, we have CPR rates going down. Across almost all the economies in Africa and all the other economies of the world, we have that happening. Expansionary policies are now, and especially on the monetary side. The question we need to ask ourselves as Kenyans, as we enjoy the summer in the economic sphere of the world, how is Kenya taking advantage of that? And just use the data. One, we have a CPR rate coming down. Every other meeting, if not sustaining the previous rate, we are climbing down. But who is benefiting from the lowering of the rating rates in Kenya? And when I talk about economics, I like referring to the government data, because the beauty is that we still have some institutions that give credible data, and especially the CPK and the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. Now, we have a situation where Kenya is having expansionary monetary policy and lowering of lending rates. But who is benefiting? Because you have on one side lowering of rates, the same government data then shows that the private sector lending is actually going down, not growing. So in Kenya, monetary easing is purely a debt management tool. Purely. That the only parameter that is being eyed in terms of monetary easing and lowering of rates is basically paying less interest in the domestic debt, and therefore what is supposed to happen is not happening, because always rates should go down as a way of incentivizing private sector. But you have rates going down, but in the same breath and from the same source, then we have a report again on the other side showing that the lending to private sector in Kenya is actually shrinking. And therefore that is a very huge cause of alarm, because we must harness whatever is happening globally, because it doesn't last for too long. Second thing that we have to be aware of, so that we take advantage of what we have now. Economies are always cyclical. Right now, President Trump is almost forcing the Fed that they have to cut the rates. And they will almost, I'm sure they will succumb this week. Now, after that, how is the economy supposed to now behave after that? We have low rates. We will definitely, again, in the next few months, start having a discussion about managing inflation, because those go hand in hand together. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we need to harness what we have now as an advantage globally, make a way of making our private sector buoyant and grow, so that in a rainy day, we'll have institutions that will support our economy. But when it is sunshine, we still cannot give warmth to the business sector or the private sector, because the government is crowding out the private sector from banking, from lending. In our economic, I mean the easiest chapters of economics, we were told one of the roles of government and a central bank is to release money to the people through many tools, including fiscal policy in terms of spending. So we grew up knowing that the work of central bank, in quotes, is to print money, in quotes because it's figurative, and figure out how this money will end up in my pocket. Through many ways, spending, through financial instruments, and the rest. In Kenya, that has reversed. The work of the central bank now and government is actually to mop up money from the private pocket and then give to the government. That is why you see every month we are having fundraisings from government in terms of raising money. And what has that brought now, up to now? Out of those things that I'm talking about, our national debt now has grown to 12 trillion Kenya shillings. Over. It's now, because we borrow every day on average, maybe we are now talking about 12.4 trillion Kenya shillings. I have a figure from the previous times that we talked about debt. And I talked about these figures the other day, which are factual again. And every Kenyan, the picture about Kenya now is that we may have shortfalls, but at least the Constitution guarantees that we get part of the public information for free when you need it. So, the current debt is over 12 trillion shillings. So in a year we are borrowing 1.25 trillion Kenya shillings. And by the way, last year, government went against the law and overborrowed more than it had been budgeted. Because we had budgeted as a country to borrow around 1 trillion Kenya shillings. The government, by the close of the last financial year, actually borrowed more and borrowed 1.25 trillion Kenya shillings. What that means is that we are borrowing around 100 billion every single month. And every single day, including today, Monday. By tomorrow morning, the country will have borrowed 3.4, 3.5 billion every single day. And therefore, every hour we are talking about around 140 million shillings every hour. So we've been here for 2 hours. So we borrowed that much. And you know, many times I think we need to sober up as a country. Because if we don't sober up, the economy will force us to sober up. And when the economy forces us to sober up, it will not be very easy, like giving a speech as I'm doing today. The ramifications will be dire. Maybe what we need to do is to take some of the people from the National Treasury for a benchmarking trip to Ghana. And they interact with the real people. Not the economy. You know, many times you talk about jargons, GDP and the rest. You now go and interact with a pensioner in Ghana. Interact with a person who had bought government instruments in Ghana, who after they borrowed too much, they had to call borrowers in a round table and tell them, guys, listen, I know I owe you 1 million shillings, but from today I am the sovereign. I owe you only 700. That's what they call a haircut. Okay, take government to court, you are given even something, you have to chota government. Okay, where will you start? Getting a GK vehicle on the road, or where? You see, some of these things, they seem like superlatives, but they are real. The government tells you, you're a pensioner, I owe you this much. But from today, you are taking a haircut of 30%. Haircut means I'm cutting. Not postponing, cutting. Forget everything else, me, I owe you this. That is where Ghana ended. And when you hear us talking about debt, it is because if you reach there, it is catastrophic. And it would affect everyone. And it would affect all the facets of our economy. There is the other thing, so that I wind up with debt. And I'll be very brief today. PS was asked about something I've been talking about called securitization. And when you get a chance, you explain to us based on your experience. There are people who want to tell us securitization, you can treat it as something outside of the debt. You tell us whether that is possible. Because from where all of us sit, it's not possible. You can't have a shop. You are running a shop in Kakamega, a hardware shop. You take a debt from the local bank. You are supposed to service this debt using, of course, the proceeds from your hardware. Then you go to a different bank and say, please lend me money. Part of the things I sell is cement. So I want to securitize what I get from cement. It will come directly to you. That's what is called securitization. If you go to a different bank, you already have borrowed money from bank A. And you are servicing that debt out of the profit from the entire profit from your hardware. Then you get another bank on the side and you tell them the revenue from cement and from steel, chuma, ile nauza, it will now be coming to you. And then you want to tell us that is not supposed to affect this other debt. I mean, I keep saying, every time you hear about a big Kizungu Miki context in Kenya, coming from government, you hear a big name like securitization, it is just supposed to tire you so that you don't question. But something must be happening that is not right. And just do your math, you'll see. I talked the other day about a debt of a boat that was raised by securitizing sports fund to build stadiums. Let me start here. Kenya has always built stadiums. You know, many times you want to appear like we are now, we have innovated ways of building stadiums in Kenya. Kenya has always built stadiums. We have never securitized any revenue. So the issue about building a stadium is not there. The issue is about how are you building. So we end up borrowing around 45 billion Kenya shillings. Whichever method you use, even if you use future value of annuity, or you use a simple arithmetic of interest rate, in 15 years, Kenya will have paid interest rate of over 100 billion on a loan of 45 billion. And those are facts. Then we go and securitize fuel levy. And we say we are building roads with this fuel levy. Let me start here. Kenya has always built roads. All the roads we saw in our villages and estates when we were growing up, it was not black paint painted on our roads, it was tarmac. So it's not a new invention. We have always built tarmac roads. We have always built Mombasa Road, is a road that was built many years back. Thika Road, the road to the Western Corridor. It's not new, it has been there. But now, we want to collect money that Kenya is supposed to collect for the next 7 years. We want to collect today and use it today. Now, the government in the ensuing years, what are you going to come to do as government? You know, many times, you know, people are here politically, oh, there is a way people want people to talk, for example, as politicians. But what is more important to talk as a Kenyan today than about the future of our country? We may talk about leading the country, but which country? First address that the country is there. So when the country is there and functioning, you can talk about the other things. And that is why I think these things are very important. So in a nutshell, this is what I'm trying to say. We are borrowing 1.25 trillion every year, 100 billion every month, 3.5 billion shillings every day, around 145 million every hour, but every road you see in Kenya ongoing is not part of that debt. That has a different debt called securitization of fuel levy. So let no one tell you, we are borrowing this to build roads. No, the debt for building roads is not even there. We are borrowing that money, but when you ask, you'll be told, can't you see we are building even Talanta Stadium? This is the point. The money for building Talanta Stadium is actually not there. It is a different debt, not included in this mainstream debt. The other thing, so that, because it's the same, this issue of debt is big. Now, we want also to expand a lot of things to be seen for optics, as they are also good for the economy. The road from Nairobi to Nakuru is long overdue in terms of expansion. And the people who use that road deserve that road to be dualed. But even the money for dualing Nairobi-Nakuru highway, that money is also not part of the borrowed money, the 12 trillion. That is some other money we are raising through a baptized name called PPP. But that PPP is actually workers' money through NSSF. So NSSF is forced to invest workers' money on a commercial venture called a PPP to build a road from Nairobi to Nakuru. And they are told how to recover their money is to put toll stations, charge motorists, watapata pesa yao hapo. So even the expansion of that road is not part of the borrowed money. So what and again, the Talanta Stadium I talked about, because private sector is rational. A person in the private sector, when you tell them to invest money, it is me and you here. When I call you to invest in an instrument, you are likely to ask me questions. And because the government did need to answer many questions, that Talanta board I keep talking about, I request all of you to go and check who bought it. The number one investor in that board was again one of the banks I'll not name, which has attachments with government. And the number two was again NSSF. Number three was the superannuation fund, again money for workers. So if you are raising a board that is attractive, why are private sector not buying? that government money through another way, and especially workers' money, has to be the ones now to be put in that kind of radar. These things are important, and if they are good, then the speech today should not be an accusation. Should be just an opportunity for those who did it to come and inform Kenyans better. And many times I wonder, for example, on securitization of the fuel levy. You are a bank CEO, and you committed money for your shareholders and lend, let's say, 50 billion shillings on something called securitization. You have no sovereign guarantee. The 7 shillings on which the money is securitized was just a gazette notice from the minister. If another minister comes tomorrow and writes off the 7 bob, where will this bank, where will the bank recover the money from? If there is other people in terms of policy in Kenya, and they don't honor the debt, there's nowhere you can go. But of course the government did that knowingly because of the urgency of the money. Mabanks na wale wengine wamenunua boats, mtajipanga baadaye. As I go to the finish, the things I talked about, we are in summer, that we have rates coming down from last year, should give us a good opportunity to grow. But how are we growing as Kenya? The Kenyan GDP grew by 4.7%, the previous data that we have for 2024. And by that, we extol that growth. But how is it in the region? Kenya was actually the last in terms of growth in our region. Rwanda grew by 8.9% in the same period. Tanzania grew by 5.5% in the same period. Uganda grew by 6.1% in the same period. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to be logical, everyone who has a position to make decisions for our country. So that even as we give good narratives out there, narratives can only sell up to some point. And then from there, the reality knocks the door. Kenya has the potential to be the leader in terms of economic growth in the region. Currently, we are last in all our neighboring countries. I don't think that is something to celebrate. It is something to call us to wonder. Allow me, there's something I forgot, just 1 minute. I talked about Nakuru, Mausamit Road. I mean, Nairobi, Nakuru Road. I call it that way because it's more identifiable that way. That road is part of the road from Mombasa all the way to Malamba. It's part of it. It's a corridor road. Any person who would do just basic empirical analysis of that road, one thing is clear. NSSF, being the lead investor in that road, will never recover the money. But that road also must not be told, because for ease of doing business, the reason why other economies would do better than us is when investors start choosing those countries better or more than us. When you come and do any part of Mombasa, Maraba Road, basically what you are doing is to increase the cost of business, including for people like our neighboring country, Uganda, who have to import their commodities through us. So that road should be built, and should be built by the internally generated resources which are there. And therefore, the road from Nairobi to Nakuru should be dwelled, and the residents who use that road should not be made to pay toll on that road. Because we may think it's a commercial venture, but it will come and hurt our economy. Because if in our region the corridor roads are not tolled, you are basically telling people to look for options. And our country needs investors much more even than our neighbors, because our neighbors are growing faster than us. Let me talk about just one specific policy, then I'll be done. My sister asked about, okay, otoheni hii mambo mengi ya huku juu mingi. Now, conceptualize the economy to me. That's how I understand that question. Now stop talking about all these expenditure, what, this, that. Can you put the economy in a manner that can be perceived easily? I'll just use only one policy instrument that we are doing as Kenya. And then I'll leave it to you to weigh whether it's good or bad. Housing levy in Kenya, I saw the other day that it even surpassed, and we ended up collecting 73 billion shillings on housing levy. I want to be consequential so that we see why it is important to keep on tracking policy instruments and therefore to see whether they need amendments along the way. After we instituted the housing levy and we started housing projects in Kenya, I'm just using this as an example. So the government is collecting 73 billion, literally taking 73 billion off the pockets from the private sector and households. Now, what is the output? 1 year that is passed, I'm using the recent data that Kenya has is 2024, where even the housing levy surpassed its target. That's the year I'm talking about. Industry in Kenya, industry is viwanda, decelerated. From the previous year where we grew by over 2% based on the year-on-year, on 2024 compared to 2023, we decelerated to the growth of 1.5%. Second, when we are busy building houses through housing levy, as Kenya, through government, the cost, I'm using government data, not my data. Government released data from KNBS. The construction sector in Kenya, when Kenya was very busy, the busiest year in building housing, the housing program, the construction sector in Kenya shrank by 2%. Not grew, not even decelerated, it went down by 2% in 2024. The consumption of cement in Kenya, in that year we are building houses, the consumption of cement went down by 7.9%. The consumption of steel in Kenya went down. This is the other thing that can make you sometimes wonder. I have seen government officials and they are saying the housing project has created 300,000 jobs. Others say 500,000 jobs. Others say this kind of jobs. And they say new. Now, the same government data shows us this. In the year 2024, the people employed in the construction sector shrank by negative 1.3%. And all the people employed in that sector is only 223,400, a less number than in the year 2022 when we never had the housing levy. When am I talking about this? Many times, we may be beating drum on this side for celebration, but the economy cannot be cheated. What this is showing is that the money for the housing levy was more efficient for our economy when it was in the pockets of Kenyans. That Kenyans were building their houses more efficient than how government can build them. Are we getting that? Because the pictures we see on the timelines on Facebook and social media, advertisements of housing project, then should translate into data. But then we see photographs, but what this has done is to actually remove the people who are working in private-led housing projects. That is the sector we have now come in, as the government has come in, made it shrink, and then out of the inefficiency of government, the same sector leads the economy to lag. So I leave it to you to see. The housing levy, is it more efficient with government or is it more efficient with the private sector? Or in your pocket to decide how to build your home and to decide how to use it? Because it shows when you had that money, the economy was growing faster. Very lastly, sometimes ile karatasi EPRA wanatumia kutangaza mafuta imeshuka, si iko bei kali hata kuliko ile bei wanashukisha nayo mafuta. Because now I have seen that fuel has now come down by 11 cents for diesel. 11 cents means 0.11 shillings. And for petrol I have seen it 0.8. If I look, the peak of fuel in Kenya, the peak globally, was in around, for the last several months, was in June, around 23rd, globally. Per barrel it was around $73. Now we are talking about $63. That is a decrease by 14% in global oil prices. Why is global oil prices decreasing by 14%? And in Kenya it is decreasing by 11 cents. You know, I talked about this earlier, and I talked about a new levy that was introduced last year. And I saw all ministers come to defend it. Now please come also defend this sense. Because this issue of fuel prices is not an easy topic. It is very important. Because our factories run on fuel. Our economy runs on fuel. When we keep on increasing the cost of fuel, at any point we get an opportunity, and we do not in commensurate manner lower when the global oil prices are going low, we are basically handing over Kenya to our neighbors. And we are basically handing over manufacturing to our neighbors. We are basically saying we are inefficient in all the facets of the economy that use fuel. Let us be forthright, and we make sure with the same haste that the government raises fuel prices when fuel prices goes up globally, it should be the same haste fuel prices come down. And we keep on knowing the more levies we increase, the more cost we put on in terms of fuel, immediately the more we make our economy inefficient and we hand over our opportunities to other countries who are neighboring. I thank you very much. May God bless you.
Right, let's give a good round of applause to Ndindi. I want to invite any media or anyone in the plenary who has a question for him to ask it from here, because he will not be available for another side session. So any person from the media? All right. Okay. That's one. Yep. Any other? Right, you can come on in.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jimmy Mboko from citizenTV. A quick question for Mheshimiwa, which is very simple. You served as the budget chair, and the question that I want to know is why the sudden clarity? Why is it that suddenly you were very clear on issues that you sat in a position that you could have addressed these issues? Thank you.
Anyone?
Good morning, everyone. I am Brian Jojotino from Nation Media Group, just across the street over here. My question to Honorable Nyoro is, you have come out, not necessarily perhaps in this forum, but previously to speak against the debt appetite that the government has, especially in the domestic market, and we understand that it's crowding out the private sector in its quest to access affordable credit. I mean, if you're a banker and you're getting an assured sum of say 18-16%
for example, for an infrastructure bond that is not necessarily taxable, then you would rather lend to the government who is a sure debtor, for example, compared to you and I, who run a very high risk, and you know the politics around risk-based lending in this city. But now the question I'm asking is, we have a budget to fund 4.2 trillion, and there's a deficit. You don't want us to borrow. We need social services, of course, but there is also the need for, we're also trying to avoid austerity measures. What is your proposal of financing this deficit, this budget deficit, about, I think about 900 billion or so? Thank you.
Any question? Okay. Last one.
Habari za asubuhi. Naitwa Nyoro kutoka idhaa ya radio. Mheshimiwa, tunaelewa kwamba kuna swala ambalo sasa hivi linaendelea na Kenya Pipeline Company, ambapo tunazungumzia kuna baadhi ya wale ambao wanataka kununua kampuni hii kwa manufaa yao wenyewe. Labda ndio uje pia utueleze mbeleni kwamba haya yamelipuka. Labda unaweza waeleza wa Kenya what's happening there, because tunaelewa kwamba utajiri ambao uko pale ni wa shilingi bilioni 500, lakini kuna tetesi kwamba yule ambaye anataka kununua ni shilingi bilioni 100. Waeleze wa Kenya.
Asante.
I'll answer this, but in case I don't answer sufficiently, I'm not in a hurry. We can do a rejoinder. Jimmy Pogo, thank you very much, because I get asked that question many times. Why are you speaking now? You've been somewhere there and there, and I am grateful you've given me that opportunity. One, let me talk about securitization first. The issue of securitization came on board in the year 2023. The first time it came anywhere in our meetings. And I want to make it very clear so that we have clarity on this issue. That meeting had all the decision makers around the finances of our country, including the CS National Treasury there, and including the PS who is still there now. And I want to confirm to Kenyans, in the meeting I was, we all declined this issue of securitization, because it was common knowledge to all of us that any money you borrow through securitization is a debt, and therefore cannot be treated separately as anything different. And therefore, I think that suffices. I was there, we could not. Secondly, I would request that we all check the reports that came out of the Parliamentary Budget Office in the last 3 years. And you check our stand on debt. And you check our stand on the things I'm talking about. And you'll see consistency in what we stand for. And even beyond me, even my seniors then, every time they could speak, no one was speaking in terms of borrowing. Everyone was speaking in terms of lowering our appetite for debt. But when it comes to action, there is something different. The last thing, when you are serving in a capacity that I was serving before, just as you serve in any other capacity around government, because as you understand, when in the positions of departmental committees and other committees like the one I was, you work very closely with the National Treasury and the government of that time. There is something called, I would call it collective responsibility. And this is what works politically. In politics, you leave your seniors to talk about all the good things. Because even me as an MP, my CDF chairman leaves me to say all the good things about the work you are doing. And then, do I need to explain further? I think you've got it. So, I want you to check all those, because many times I see people saying, hey, kwani wanaongea sahi? It's because of those reasons. Basically, collective responsibility then permitted, you have to let I mean, you are not the head of government. You are just some chairman somewhere there. So we had to do that time. And I'm glad, and I'm sure Bogo, you are glad that I've been there and I'm now here. Because at least now I can talk to you freely without having any issue of collective responsibility. And I am glad for this opportunity also, because it helps me to also inform Kenyans in an area I have been and I know. And I don't think it can get better than that. That it is the chef who is telling you about the menu and about the recipe. Bwana Otieno from Nation, I agree with you entirely. The government comes to the market, they borrow. This year they will likely borrow close to $1 trillion in the domestic market. Basically that is money that could have gone to this industry and the other to enhance their production. So that money is no longer available to them because the government has taken it. Because as a banker, bankers choose the low risk, high return. Now that is doing a lot of harm. Beyond crowding out, these are the issue of pending bills is hurting the same banks that are majorly buying the government instruments. Because if you look at the NPLs in our commercial banking sector, you realize they are climbing up. So banks being, one of their problems is being solved, yet a bigger one is being created on the side. Because you deny money to the private sector, the private sector denies you money as banks. Because if you give me money, for example, to build this hotel as a bank, and I build it up to the point of just furnishing, and I come to you and tell you, top up my loan, I furnish the hotel. And as the bank, you say, no, the government is here, they want money. You may default, the government can't. So you deny me money. You give this money to government. So all the money I had borrowed from you to put up the structure, then I will not be able to pay you. So that is booked in the books of the banks, commercial banks, as an NPL. So on this one side, the commercial banks think they are taking advantage of the high appetite of borrowing locally, but on the other side, it is hurting them directly through NPLs, and especially when private sector cannot pay. But then you asked, where do we get money from? And I'll ask you, money for what? This is the reason. We have a budget of 4.2 trillion. Okay, what is fundamental between this year and last year, for example? If we have an increase of 200 billion, what is this so fundamental that we are doing this year that we are not doing last year, that we have added a budget of 200 billion? I want just to point one thing. Why? Some of the money we are borrowing, Kenya does actually not need it. Here they are experts in the economy. Go and check the budget that we are implementing today, and you realize Kenya has budgeted over 50 billion Kenya shillings for political management. Those who are here, they know what I mean, political management. The money you see being dished out is not grown. It comes from your pocket. And I want you to go check. One of the parameters I saw Kenya was to do last year was to do away with confidential fund. Go check how much money it is in all the areas that confidential fund is. And you realize the money we borrowed for Talanta Stadium, we have also budgeted an equivalent money just for political management. Political management. I'm being diplomatic. Ligan talked about privatization of Kenya Pipeline. There is something I want to put into perspective without going into details. The former president of Zambia was the late Edgar Lungu. The current president is called Hakainde Hichilema. both two gentlemen are products of privatization. The money they ended up having to be able to marshal a presidential bid and both of them becoming presidents, they are products of privatization. One acted as a lawyer for many transactions. Go check who was a lawyer between the two. The other one used to work for the Big Four and ended up as a TA, transaction advisor. So privatizations are good when they are done without vested interest. When Kenya divests from any assets, it's good. But the problem with Kenya today is that there is a trust deficit. If you ask me, because I am glad to have had some experience in the capital markets. The stock market in Kenya may appear bullish now. Bullish because shares are going up. But companies are still grossly undervalued. Any bank that is listed in Kenya is worth less than a bank that is not listed, of equivalent profitability, of equivalent assets, of equivalent everything. Because the market is not very ripe to value companies upwards. Were it not for the trust deficit, the best route would have been to arrange for a strategic investor. Unfortunately, we may arrange for a strategic investor and the person could be the one next to your table when you are discussing it. So privatization wholesomely is good, but we have to remove vested interest. And the best way to do it is this way. Whatever you value that company, it's okay. Value it even at 1 shilling. But sell all the companies to local individuals who are Kenyans. Then from there, you cut off all the brows of any mysterious person. When you say yes, you are privatizing this company, but we have no money to allocate companies or foreigners. We have only money to allocate verifiable Kenyans as individual shareholders. And then you put a cap that you can only invest not more than 1 million shillings in this offering. Then from there, utasikia hiyo, we postpone, we do this, then namna hiyo. Asante.
Thank you very much. Allow us to close the session for questions and answer there. If you want to see him, you'll see him bilaterally. At this juncture, I want to invite Martin to wrap it up for us. And then we'll have a bit of photo ops, so please, our guests, don't leave yet. Martin will be very brief.
To our chief guest, MP for Kiharu, Ndindi Nyoro, our CEO James Muraguri, our esteemed guests, our partners, our stakeholders, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. You have had an opportunity to listen to the media diagnostic report. You have got an opportunity to listen to the panel discussions, and more so the insights from our chief guest, Ndindi Nyoro, and we all come here to a realization that we need something done. And that something will be done by a collective responsibility by all of us in this room. So mine is to sincerely thank you on behalf of IPF for working this journey with us and for making sure that you are counted in a forum like this that is trying to shape a nation for us and for our future generation. So mine is to just give you an appeal as an individual, organization. Let us get out from this room with our hands up, knowing that it is our job and duty to ensure that we have a future that we can be proud of. Thank you so much. And before I finish, I'll request that we have a photo session that will be guided by our MC, Ruth Kendago. Thank you so much. May God bless you all.
give a warmer round of applause to all of us, to our guests today, to our guest speakers, for the insightful, interesting discussions that we have had. And I do hope that as we leave this room, each and every one of us has picked at least one thing for us to go action, for us to think about, for us to write about, for us to speak about at each and every opportunity that we have. I will take this moment to now welcome our CEO and our chief guest today. We will start with you, and then we welcome our panelists after that.